All right. That's probably overstating. Like, not that impressive. So, hello everybody. Thanks for coming out. I'm going to do a quick little intro here before we get started. But how many of you are new to OrlandoDevs? This is your first OrlandoDevs. Okay. Wow, that's a lot of you. All right. Actually, most of you. So that's cool. Well, thank you for coming. We're glad to have you. So if you don't already know, we are actually a registered 501c3 charitable organization. We run this meetup. We run a Slack group as well that has about, what are we at, about 4,000 people now on Slack. And we also help run a number of organizations that we help volunteers like Chris back there run other meetups around Orlando, like the PHP meetup, the iOS meetup, Project Codex. Anyway, oh yeah, I'm just trying to see if I can remember. So, on that note, if you are not already part of the Slack group, just let us know. We can get you invited. It is really great it's a great opportunity to leave here and still connect with people, other developers in the Orlando community. So keep the conversation going when there's no meetup. So yeah, as I was saying, we don't run. We help volunteers who run and support them in running the Orlando PHP meetup, the Android developers group, sorry, the iOS wrong, Project Code Experience, and Orlando Startup Demos. So that's some of what we do. And if you really, really want to support us, you can support us via Patreon, and give a little bit to help out your developer community. All right, so Jock, you're doing the quiz. Jock is like the quiz master. He needs intro music of his own, but Jock, this is Jacques Fu for everybody.
Hello,
Jock
everybody.
helps me run OrlandoDevs as well. We kind of co-organize this together.
It's actually harder than you think. Get these little quizzes going.
Yeah.
By the way,
I've got T-shirts that I can give. So the top 3 people are guaranteed a shirt, and then I'll have some left over.
Fantastic. One of the cool things about a meetup is that we are in person. So take a minute while I set this up to introduce yourself to the person that you might not know, to the behind you, to the side of you. Take advantage. Compare which one has the better programming stack.
It's not working?
No, I just use my phone.
The Wi-Fi works?
Yeah, lucky enough for me.
Yeah, the Wi-Fi works. Well, I guess I don't know.
But you do that, do you mind if I say a few words?
Yeah,
Oh,
please.
yeah.
Please.
Sure, go ahead.
I got 2 microphones. Cool. Check this out.
Double-fisted.
Hi there. I just wanted to very quickly, since so many hands went up when we said who's new to Orlando Devs. It's very cool to see so many people. And my name is Luis Garcia. I'm the Vice President for Emerging Technologies here at Full Sail University. I just wanted to welcome you to Full Sail University. We're very excited to host most of the meetups for ODevs. And our motive for that is because we want to provide a platform for the local tech community. We're hoping that you will consider our fantastic engineers that we graduate here in your jobs once you start hiring people, because everybody's growing. And we do graduate some amazing programmers and computer scientists and web developers and mobile developers and people in simulation and all those things. So thank you for coming. If you ever want more information about our university, please hit me up, and we'll give you the information anywhere. And please keep coming here. And thank you, Jack and Ryan, for doing this.
Thank you.
Here's your microphones.
Appreciate it. Thank you,
It's being a little... Yeah. There we go. Let's try this. How's that?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So,
Here you go.
let's do it. All right. phones, and you're going to go to kahoot.it, and you're going to enter this game pin in, and then when everyone's kind of all set, then we'll start the quiz. And the questions will be up on the screen, and the corresponding answers you're going to enter in on your phone. It's kind of based by like colors and symbols. It's kind of like meant for kindergartners, but like we can use it too. Oh, and if we're streaming, streamers can be entering the show as well.
I don't know how I'm gonna get in the t-shirt, but let's see. Can you stream that?
We gotta rush over here. Oh, they're at a time disadvantage too. So if you want to win the quiz, you're better off being in person
That's true.
because there's a lag.
That's a reason to
All right. Good to go?
think
Solid.
we're
All right. 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's go. All right. 6 questions. First question. What does apt-get moo on a Linux command line Debian base do? Does it install moo tools, print a picture of a cow, generate an error? I'm going to turn down the volume here. Prints a picture of a cow. That's correct. It was a trick one. I understand. So, BB Splitter, where are you? All right, you're the one to beat. Next question. The jam in JAMStack stands for?
This was pretty easy.
Nice. So you got a sneak preview already of what this is about. Oh wow, what is in the lead? Where's what? What? All right, see who can knock what out. What is the newest ODevs network meetup? Okay, most of you know. I'm very impressed. Very impressed. What? Still in the lead. Very nice. Jay Patters and these guys are getting the t-shirts so far. So. All right, question 4. Which of the following was created with PHP? Is it Google, Pinterest, Minecraft, or Facebook? That's right, it's Facebook. And actually, you can see some of this code online, and it's awful.
Alright. Well,
Jay Patters is now in the lead. Where's Jay Patters? Nice. There's a time-based element to this as well, so guessing sometimes works in your favor. Which language is releasing a spaceship operator in version 20? If you know some of these languages, then you'll automatically know which ones don't even go to version 20. So that helps. Oh, wow.
that was a tough one.
That was a tough one. All right, was that all 6 questions? I can't remember. I wasn't counting. Oh no, one more. What is the official meaning of the HTTP status code 418? Is it on the teapot, redirect, not found, server error?
I think yeah.
On the teapot, that's true. Official spec. Okay, and now for the final judgment here. Jay Patters, Efren, and Aaron. Where are you guys? Raise your hands. You need some t-shirts.
Yeah. Do you want to stack your t-shirt in?
I have a stack with teacher already.
Oh, okay,
All right.
good point.
So
What do you
what
know?
Well, I don't have one.
Which
All
one?
right, you
Black
can
one?
have it.
I have the one that Brian has.
Oh,
What are the other ones?
Is that a good size? What size
All
do you
right.
need?
That's a medium.
Oh,
What size do you need?
opened up.
I wanted to make sure they get their size. I
Oh,
have
good
plenty.
point. Throw random sizes
Yeah,
out.
just throwing random. Huh?
XL.
You need big ones? Do you need? Is that good size, or you need different ones?
All right, come
right.
see me after.
Yeah, I'll get you. Yeah. Well, okay, cool. I will get you guys your sizes, and then I'll have some extras left over for later. So, all right, that was fun. I would not have won had I even participated. So we want to again thank Full Sail as their venue sponsor. As Luis mentioned, they've helped us throughout the year. They basically give us this awesome venue for many of the months of the year, and so it's been great. Thank Fat Merchant as a community sponsor, as well as a Blue Wave, who is a partner sponsor. I don't think Blue Wave is here tonight, but anybody? No, they're not here tonight. Okay, so Fat Merchant is Jacques is with Fat Merchant.
We are looking for a Android developer and a full stack JavaScript developer. So you can visit our website, fatmerchant.com.
Awesome. Anybody else hiring? Oh yeah, you're hiring. You want to tell?
Well, I can say one.
So I'm a CTO of Forestry.io. We're a content management system for the JAMStack that you'll learn in a few minutes. But we're hiring a back-end developer, like a front-end developer, and a community manager, dev rel type person. So and we're a remote first company. So we're in Canada, but you can still be here.
Unless you want to move to Canada.
I don't know, Canada's better.
If you can take the cold. All right. Also, Netlify, for those of you who already know a little bit about JAMStack, probably already heard of Netlify, but Netlify has, we want to thank them. They've agreed to sponsor this, so that's how today we got the little bit of fancy food as opposed to pizza. But thanks to Netlify for sponsoring the meetup. So, don't have a ton of announcements, but OrlandoJS has a meetup next week over at SitePlan. If you're interested in that, check out meetup.com and sign up. I will be there myself, so that should be a good one. We have coming up, did you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, actually. So I love startups. Fat Merchant is a startup. We came out of our local accelerator, and we just have a great community. We need lots of people with new ideas. So Startup Weekend is a great opportunity to join a team and just do it, right? Like, we always want to talk about starting new things. Well, here's your opportunity to actually go someplace and do it. And if you go on my Twitter, Jacques K. Fu, of course you can all spell that, right? I have, if you want to pitch me your idea, I've got a thread going there, and I'm going to give away 2 tickets as well. So if you just want to buy them, otech rocks is a discount code, and you can use that. But it's a great event. We won globally 2 years in a row, I think 2017 and 2018. So we want to keep Orlando on the map and keep this, a growing ecosystem. So,
Okay, cool. I was just looking through the t-shirt, sorry. All right. Oh, and this is my thing. So I am running an event here in February 10th and 11th, called Flashback Conference. It's for front-end developers. It's like all front-end development JavaScript, but with a little bit of history mixed in, so you learn the new stuff, but you learn where it came from. I've got some really great speakers lined up. If you go to flashback.dev, you can see all the speakers. Keynoting is Kyle Simpson and Estelle Weil, who Kyle Simpson, for those of you who don't know, wrote You Don't Know JS, and Estelle Weil's been in HTML web standards for ages. She's awesome. So tickets are only $149 right now, which is for 2 days is, I think, pretty good price. So flashback.dev. Anyway, hope to see you there. So first up, I'm going to preface this with saying, because of catching a flight, we're doing this kind of reverse order. Normally I'd say, okay, let's do the intro to what is JAMStack first, but But I want to make sure that Jordan doesn't miss his flight, because he came all the way down here from Prince Edward Island, you said, right? Yeah. So actually, we should put that on the quiz. Like, do you know where Prince Edward Island is? Pick it on the map. So y'all would have missed it. I know it. Okay, so we are kind of going to do this in reverse order. I'm going to go second, which is going to. So I guess I'll preface this by saying, if there's terminology or anything about the JAMStack that you don't quite get yet, I will cover that after. So anyway, well, welcome Jordan, and thanks for coming all the way from. So let's unhook this. Do you want to use this one, or do you have your own?
Does this mic work, or do I need one of those?
I don't think this works.
Okay.
Sorry. Oh, can we turn it? Oh yeah, I guess it does work.
Great. It's hard to code with one hand.
While he's getting set up, who wants medium? Medium. One. All right, we got a large. If you're really far, it's hard for me to throw, but I'll try and get it. All right, another medium. All right. Whenever you're ready.
Well, I'm completely frozen at the moment, so
I
hope you brought a lot of t-shirts.
All right, large. Sorry, I didn't even get to the edge. All right, another large. Medium.
If we had more patrons, we could get a t-shirt can.
There you go. There's a medium. All right. Sorry? If they're not rolled up, they don't go very far. Is it working?
I had to restart, but
Small. Yes. Winner. All right. Another small.
Yes!
It's a good thing I have a lot of t-shirts.
yeah.
Don't switch to mugs.
Medium.
No. Did you put buttons up there? I have buttons in my bag. Yeah. Okay.
All right, down the last few. Medium. Oh, sorry.
No, they're in the bag, in my
Didn't quite
bag.
make it. All right. Large. That was an easy throw. And last one, large. Sorry.
Okay. I think maybe we're
Good?
Yeah.
All right.
Round of applause for Jordan Patterson.
Yay!
All right.
We're good with the screen share, but now it's that screen. Hold on. You know, I've got another connector, maybe. Because it's not an Apple one. It's not the Apple. It's really picky.
Well, you have another one?
Yeah. I've got like
An official one?
an official Apple one that only costs like.
No meetup would be complete without technical difficulties.
Okay.
There's a black screen there.
Good?
One of the first about to break out the programmer jokes too.
Yeah, this feels like a, how many programmers did fake a screw in a light bulb?
We're good.
None, it's a hardware problem. Okay, so off to a rough start so far, but, so my name's Jordan. I'm the CTO of Forestry.io, where we build a content management system for the JAMStack. We actually now build 2 content management systems for the JAMStack. The new one is called TinaCMS. So I'm going to give a demo of Tina and kind of what it can do. But first, I'm wondering, like, how many people in the room are familiar with the JAMStack? How many people have, like, built a Gatsby site? Cool. Or how many people have built like a Hugo or Jekyll site? All right. So I want to talk briefly first about the current state of content management on the web and the future of content management on the web. So at the moment, there's kind of 2 separate approaches. We have the old style legacy traditional CMS like WordPress, and then we have the DIY site builders. So these 2 approaches are kind of at odds with each other. You've got a really good developer experience, some might say, for WordPress, and then you've got a really good editor experience for the site builder, but the traditional CMS lacks the editor experience. There's a very big disconnect in between the content that you're entering into a series of forms and the content as it appears on the web. And with the DIY site builder, the developers have absolutely no control. It's just a black box. So these are all different content management systems currently, believe it or not, even though they all look the same. And that's kind of the problem. They all kind of look the same, work the same, feel the same, and editors don't really like any of them. They just kind of have to deal with them. You can break it down to, right now we have like a series of fields. There's a couple of buttons and then some navigation to move around your content. But as you can tell, like, this looks nothing like the web page will. So the solution to that at the moment is this preview button, which is hardly the best user experience anyway, but now with the JAMStack, that preview button is often even gone away because everything is so decoupled. With the DIY site builder, you have this really awesome user experience, but again, the developer is kind of left in the dark when oftentimes even out of the equation, because this is just a black box. So as developers, we tend to, or as web developers anyway, we tend to shy away from these because we have we have no control over them. So right now we kind of have these two opposing forces, but we don't think they have to be at odds with each other, which is why we made TinaCMS. So we can now give developers the control that they like having over the projects, and editors an editing experience that they like. So this is TinaCMS. I don't know how many people get the reference. For those of you that don't, Napoleon Dynamite. There was a llama named Tina. So when I had to shut down, all of my demo setup also went away, so bear with me. All right, so this is just a basic Gatsby starter blog. Gatsby is a static site generator. It's a JavaScript project. So with Tina, this is Tina down here, this little editing icon. When I click on this, the sidebar pops out. And right now, it's kind of empty. But we can easily make this site live. Give the site a live editing experience with very little code. Again, so with Gatsby, we need to install. There's a couple of npm packages. We add this to our Gatsby plugin, and then from our blog post template, we can import remark form. We can wrap our template with remark form and then add a few fields to our query. And I apologize for the non-Gatsby developers in the room. So doing that, now if we go into one of these blog posts, this is the content on this page that's editable. What is it, ODevs? So you can notice it's a live editor. It's built into your site. And so this is a markdown editor on the side here. This is for the long form content. So one thing we realized was this editing long form content in this tiny little area on the side isn't really ideal. So we also created an inline editing mode. So this is just another example site that we set up, but it's been configured a bit more. So you can notice on the side there's some image editing. There's also this little group of fields down here that I can click into and edit the image of that. I can also reorder them, and they'll reorder on the page. But we have this inline editing mode where you kind of get more of a medium-like experience. So again, this is our markdown editor. And this just inherits the styles from the page. So it's a very accurate representation of what you're actually going to get. So when I'm done editing, like, that's what the site looks like. And this is easily done as well. So instead of using that remark form that we had before, we've got live remark form, which we're going to wrap that same template with. And then what that gives us here is a couple of extra properties. And then we can wrap our content, simply wrap our content with Tina field and tell it the component we want it to render. And that gives us a inline live editing, or a live editor. So this is another example site that we have set up. And this one kind of shows a bit more of the power of what we can actually do. So in this one, there's theme components that are configurable as well. So if I go into global theme, I can change colors, which, for example, this is just a hex code, which obviously isn't ideal. So if I switch over to I think it's this one. Yeah, so this is the template for that page. This is a Gatsby template. Page. Here we are. So this is text. I can change this to a color. And while I'm here, why don't I change the other ones? Now I've got a color picker. If I want to change that green to a nice red or orange, I guess. So I'm actually changing components, like theme components for this site. We've also built a form builder, which, again, these are all things that are just kind of available out of the box with this, with a little bit of configuration. We've now got this effectively a form builder. If I want to add another input and watch it blow up, I can click that, apparently. Well, it got added. But you know, if I want to change what I'm collecting here, and then apparently the other field disappeared, so that's a good feature as well. So I whipped this up just before the talk, so this is obviously going to go terrible. But if I go into this blog post, you can also build your own custom fields quite simply. So I added a meetup link. I tried to use this meetup, but you only had one event in the API. So I had to use our PEI devs meetup just for effect. But I added a meetup link to the front matter of each of these blog posts. And then by just creating a React component. So I'm using React.useState to get to store the events, and then use effect to load them. And then I'm building a select. So by adding and then see in my template to play. This is just pulling a meetup icon, and you get to see my awesome design skills here as well. So if I hit save, the sidebar will reload, and the field will not show up. So that's because I didn't add it to my, right, I didn't add it to the form. So I can simply add a new field here. I'm going to use that meetup events component. And I think I need to add it to my query, yes. Which I think means I need to restart Gatsby.
Did you share your screen?
Oh, is it stop?
Yeah.
Oh, is that what?
It says I have no internet.
Couldn't figure out which Wi-Fi was the one limited to 5, and which was the one unlimited.
I think you found
This
it.
is the one limited to 5, so don't use this one, please.
So I just kick somebody else off of there?
You did.
Okay.
But they deserved it. It's not working. Maybe if you
Hey.
Oh, there we go. All right.
Oh.
And then it comes up again.
Can
Cancel the second one.
can I double share?
Oh, no, you're sharing already.
Is it working?
Give me a second. No.
There we go.
There we go.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
I've got an error.
You have the
Live debugging is all
is
part of the
meetup
presentation.
Markdown?
It should be. It is not.
And now you gotta restart the server again.
Of course.
Gatsby generates its schema at startup time, so if that field's not there at startup time, then you have to restart the server in order to make a new one. It's frustrating.
And
Put a value, or
is it missing from another one? No, I added it to all of these.
you don't need to add it all.
All right, one more time. Hey. All right. So this is what it was supposed to look like when it came up the first time. But you can see now I've pulled in a list of meetups from an API, and then it will add the link again. This is how I styled it. And that was, that was just by creating a React component, and then just setting that as the field for that, or the component for that field. There's kind of more on the content editing side of things. There are other types of, there are different field types that you can add. For example, this about page is one content block, but we have this thing called blocks, where this is set up to be able to add another content block or a form. You can add, I should go back to Canada. All right, I will stop clicking those buttons. Let's try this one. This is for adding a new post. So we've showed how to edit content. We can also create content because that's a normal thing to do. So looks pretty normal. Shows up here, but this is again all fully configurable. If I go to,
So this is designed to run live, right? Like this is not like something you run only locally.
yeah, I'm getting to that.
Okay.
Is this? No, it's not this page. What'd you rename it to?
It's casing.
No.
Create remer.
Oh, it's a button. Sorry. Here it is. So this button is configurable. I've imported it. I've given it a label, new post, which is what shows up here. The file name, so with Gatsby, there's naming conventions that people will follow. So we allow you to configure the file name where the file gets stored at. The file name gets the form, so we've taken the title, lowercase, it's slugified it, and then created the path. So for those of you familiar with Gatsby, a lot of times you'll have an index. It'll be the name of the post / index.md. It's easy to do. We can default the front matter values. So you'll notice it already said the body was already set to this is my new post. That was because this body down here was defaulted to an H2 of the title. And then these are the fields that show up in that form. In the new post form, these are the fields that show up there. So if you need to capture more information on the initial creation, you can do that there. But as Brian pointed out, this has all just been running locally. It's built into my site. When I want to take this and actually go to production and give it to a client, we have two options. We have TinaCMS, which is a managed, hosted for paid service. And then we also have TinaServe, which is self-hosted server that you can run on a DigitalOcean droplet or on an Amazon EC2 instance or whatever. With the hosted one, we have things like role-based access and audit logging and things like that. It's kind of targeted more towards enterprise. But to do that, you can install the CLI. I think it's already installed. Yeah. Nope, not helpful. Where there's a few options. So first we need to log in if we're using the cloud one. And then I can add my repositories to it. So I guess one thing I maybe should have mentioned at the beginning is this is all powered by your Git repository. All of your content lives in Markdown in content files. So as you make changes, it's making a change to the actual file. And then when you save, it's making a commit and it's pushing it to your repository. It operates exactly the same way in the cloud. Which is, so these are some repositories I have set up already. Trying to think of which one.
You hadn't mentioned already, I know, just because it's open source.
Yeah, sorry. This is free and open source. It's available on GitHub, of course. Yeah. So, actually, let's go back to this one. This one.
The chat is saying that the terminal is kind of small in the text.
Okay. Yeah, I zoomed in on some, but not others, and apparently it just keeps getting bigger. So this is that same site running in the cloud. You get all the same functionality. I do believe save is broken on this one right now, so I can try it if you want, but we've seen how the rest of this went. Yeah, I don't know if it did anything.
It'll probably fail silently.
Yep, it failed. But anyway, so again, this one is the hosted product is still in early access. We haven't, or I say it's in early access. It's almost in early access. It will be later this week. But the served command is also coming out. So in order to use that, I need another. Oh yeah. So I'm going to start this up. And then over here, I'll run TinaCMS. And I'm going to proxy localhost 8000. Unauthorized. Okay. And then this, so you can, this will work with any OpenID Connect provider at the moment. I mean, again, it's open source. If you want to add GitHub OAuth login or you want to add some other sort of login, then go to it. But yeah, so you can run this. I do have this just running locally, but you can run the same thing on a server and protect your editing environment. And then when this builds for production, all of the Tina stuff is stripped out, and you have your production site. Yeah, I don't know how much time I have or if there's any questions, but
We can take questions if you want to.
Sure.
I know you do have a flight to catch.
yeah, but
Does anybody have any questions?
anybody completely lost?
I just have a. Do you guys have multilingual support?
It's not something that we need to have support for, if that makes sense. I don't mean to be rude, but like it's just you can configure this however you want. So you could easily make. Sorry, I put my water down. So these are, or let's go to blog page. So this, for example, is like a group. So if I click into this, there's more fields. So you could easily have languages listed down the side. And then again, when you create a new file, you could have that actually create multiple files. It's all configurable. Do you have any comments on that, or?
Yeah.
I know you were dealing with this with somebody the other day. So
Yeah, I know you got around. So.
this is Nolan, by the way.
Yeah, I'm kind of the lead on the browser side of Tina. I'll be around longer than Jordan, so I can answer any other questions after too. Yeah, I don't think there's nothing in Tina that explicitly helps you do it, but I don't think you'd have any problems with it. Like if you wanted to set up your site that when you're on the French version of your site, you go to create a new post, it creates a French post, and then you go to the English one, it creates an English post. The sidebar is contextual, so as you're navigating your site, you could be removing the French plugins and adding the English plugins or the Spanish ones. Canada, so I say French. That's one thing. Does it have the? Does this site have the plus button on it?
No, this one doesn't. This one does.
Yeah, but it's available everywhere, right?
On this site, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, another option is you could have multiple links there. Like when you go to add a new file, you could have, new English post, new Spanish post, new French post, new Italian post, whatever it might be.
Any other questions?
Hey, I wanted to know what motivated you guys to create this TinaCMS.
So I have another CMS called Forestry. This is how we started. It's kind of built for the old style static site generators, Jekyll, Hugo, I think Hexo, even 11T is kind of like that as well. And then like Gatsby came out, and it was this like kind of second gen. It kind of like started this second generation of static site generators, and now there's quite a few of them, and they kind of started popping up, and they were getting more and more traction. And we looked at what our current our existing product, Forestry, and we said, we could kind of tack on support for these newer style static site generators, or we could rethink things from the ground up and build something that's tailored and works better and gives a better experience with those. And we decided to do the latter. So. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. Hopefully you catch your flight.
I think I'll be fine.
Yeah, you'll be fine.
Oh yeah, and
Airport's easy.
there's stickers at the back, and there's
If anybody wants Forestry stickers and TinaCMS stickers, they're up here. go back to the beginning. I give you a preview. All right, let me get
for Brian.
All right.
You actually know what JAMStack means.
Yeah, so like I said, we're doing this in reverse order. So I think he asked this before, but how many of you, or it look like most of you have not done JAMStack stuff? How many of you have actually built a JAMStack site already? Only a few. Okay. So yeah, like I said, this is kind of the reverse order. So most of you, it seems like, are new to the concept. So I'm gonna hopefully clarify that for you. So just, I gave you a bunch of you t-shirts. I actually recently joined a company named StackBit. We do basically the current product right now. You can go out there and it's free, and it's kind of the easiest way to build a JAMStack site that is connected to a CMS. So there's a whole concept of headless CMS, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But if you want to be able to build even connecting to forestry as a backend, for instance, but you don't want to have to mess with all the configuration and stuff like that. You just run through 3 steps, bam, bam, bam. You have a CMS connected JAMStack site. We're also working on some tooling to allow you to view builds in Netlify and things like that. So Netlify is one of the deployment options we'll talk about in a bit. So anyway, that's my company, and hopefully you'll try that out. So what's the JAMStack? Okay, so I've been doing JAMStack for a long time. It wasn't called JAMStack until very recently. Back when I started doing this, about doing stuff like this, using things like Jekyll early on, and there were a lot of other ones that honestly I don't really use anymore, like Middleman and things like that. We just call them static site generators, right? But back then the thing was, you talk to people. I remember even going and doing presentations about this like 5 years ago. And you talk to people and they're like, well, static site generator, yeah, I mean, maybe I use that for a blog. I mean, maybe it's good for documentation. What am I going to use that for beyond that? Like, it's not a tool that I'm ever going to build a real site with. And so, I ended up doing a lot in this area. Like, I wrote a report for O'Reilly about 4 years ago, and I wrote a book with my friend Raymond Camden on this topic about 2 years ago, but even then it was still, like, nobody was really using the term JAMStack. And so JAMStack, the term itself, was actually largely brought around by Netlify themselves. And the idea was we were getting all kinds of capabilities where you could actually use a static site generator to generate static files that then suddenly had capabilities that were dynamic, right? Because you could use JavaScript and things like that and APIs to be able to bring dynamic aspects into your static site, quote unquote. So like the idea was, let's get rid of the term static site because these sites are not static. And so with I think a lot of debate, they came to me with the name and I'm like, yeah, I don't like it. I like it now. Okay, they were right. I was wrong. So it's caught on. But so what does it stand for? We had this question in the quiz. So the J is just for JavaScript. So obviously that doesn't mean that you have to be using like a Gatsby that's actually built in JavaScript. That just means that the JavaScript is really what powers your ability to do some of the dynamic aspects, to call out to APIs, to use serverless functions and things like that. So JavaScript is kind of baked into all of the powerful capabilities of this. Without the JavaScript, it is just a flat HTML file, right? But the JavaScript gives us the ability to do much more, asynchronous calls and things like that. Then there's the APIs, which is like, okay, since this is static files, we're not rendering off a server, right? We're not dynamically rendering off a server. So in order to get the dynamic portions of your site, you're going to be calling out to APIs. So as they were showing in their examples, like calling out to different APIs to fill in the form fields and things like that. Even though in the end that was a statically rendered page, it was actually pulling dynamic content using APIs. So, and then the M is for markup. And I even wrote a post about this because the M is for markup is like, M is for like everything else. Markup is a lot. Markup is Markdown. Markup is the templating language. And honestly, markup ends up including your static site generator and all these other pieces that make this possible, right? Because the static site generator is a part of this. A lot of people end up confusing. They think like the M is for Markdown because Markdown plays a big role in this whole thing, but it's not. It's for markup because markup is a lot of different things. It's HTML, it's templating language, it includes the static site generator and everything else, right? Like ends up falling under that. Now, I mean, one thing that, like, so that's where they get the jam and the JAMStack, and people are like, yeah, that applies to like every single site, right? And that's kind of true, and it's a little bit vague, I know. So that's where, like I said, like the pieces of what makes up JAMStack really ends up being like that static site generator is a key piece of all of this, right? So like if I just deploy static files, am I really doing JAMStack? No, I mean, like there's a whole build process involved and things like that. So I'm gonna kind of take a look at that. I'm not gonna dig too deep into the code because a lot of this is just covering the core concepts of it, but I'll show you a little bit more. So, but what are the benefits of building sites this way? First of all, they're fast. Because you're just serving up static files, right? And generally served up off a CDN, the sites are blazingly fast. Like we're not dealing with any calling out to a database that's going to slow the site down. We're not dealing with rendering on the server that's going to slow the site down. I mean, there's a whole bunch of pieces that are not involved here. Most of the time, when you call up a JAMStack site, it is pulling from the nearest CDN to you and it's just serving you up a static file, which loads incredibly fast. They're secure, again, because not to diss anybody's application server, but the application server is potentially compromised, and you have your database that could potentially be compromised, and you have your oftentimes, like if I'm on WordPress, well, WordPress is never compromised, right? Never. WordPress is perfectly safe. So so you have that could be compromised, Django, whatever you have running on top of it, all these layers that have security issues that need to be maintained and so on and so forth. In the end, regardless of how I built this and whether I'm using the last, an old version of Gatsby or Jekyll or Hugo or whatever it ends up being that I'm using, and all those pieces, like I'm still deploying static files, right? So you're not going to compromise my static files necessarily unless you get access to my server or whatever. But there's always a little bit of risk, but you take away a ton of risk by taking all those layers away. One of the things I love about it is they're flexible. So how many of you built a site with, let's say, WordPress? Handful of you, or like any other CMS. How many of you used the CMS to build a site, or like, okay, right? Like, so one of the things I've always found personally is that building sites with those things, I'm like trying to bend that thing to my will because I get these design specs and this is what they want the page to look like and how they want the page to interact. And I'm like trying to bend that thing so like it doesn't quite want to do what I want it to do. But the front end of a JAMStack site is like, you decide what that is and you build that however you want to build it. There's nothing dictating how that looks. There's no framework that's going to require you to build it a certain way. The front end is very flexible. I can do whatever I want to do with it. So it makes it easy. Like I find it's really easy to just kind of, somebody gives me a layout, I can just kind of convert that very easily into any static site generator and have that working out of the box really quite quickly. So, and yes, I like the Teen Titans. They're hilarious. Well, Teen Titans Go, it's hilarious. I all around love the Teen Titans. They're cool. Whether it's comic book Teen Titans or Teen Titans Go, I know people who love the comics tend to hate that cartoon, but they're wrong. So I've talked a little bit about what static site generators. I've kind of said that's a key piece in this whole puzzle. So what is a static site generator? I mean, it's really simple. It's so deceptively simple that everybody seems to think they can build their own. And you'll see what happens when everybody thinks they can build their own. Not too fun. But basically what it takes is like, it takes things like Markdown, which is part of your markup, a templating language like handlebars, YAML for like data, right? So that's like, we'll get into what front matter is, but there's data files and front matter and different ways you can put data. You can put your Sass and you can put your TypeScript, and the static site generator will just spit out static HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And that's what you deploy, right? So that's essentially what it's doing. It's taking all of these pieces, and it has a bunch of logic involved to help you build this a little bit easier, so that, for instance, it knows like, okay, I have my content all in this particular folder. Like if you do Jekyll, for instance, Jekyll kind of comes out of the box easily for like a blog. And it's like, okay, here's my post folder, and it knows like all the markdown files in there need to be converted into posts and deployed a particular way. So there's more to it than just converting from one file type to another. But then in essence, that's kind of what it does. So what happens when everybody thinks they can build their own is we end up with 463 some odd static site generators out there. So the rest of this presentation, I'll be going over them one by one. So pay close attention. Yeah, so there are a lot of them out there, but so the bad news is there's a ton, and it can be hard to figure out which one you should start with. The good news is pretty much like whatever your preference in terms of language, or there's like different styles of how these things work, you can find one that works for you. So like the one that's been around for a long time is Jekyll, and it kind of popularized this whole concept. It's built in Ruby, and so the thing about Jekyll was, part of what made Jekyll popular is that GitHub Pages, some like 5-6 years ago, added in the ability to just do your live blog or whatever site you wanted to do. If you built it in Jekyll, it knew how to build it and deploy it and everything for you. And GitHub Pages was free, so a lot of people started doing Jekyll sites. And I mean, some people nowadays diss Jekyll. I still think it's a great tool. They've actually, the new version, Jekyll 4, sped up the rendering, like the build process is quite a lot, which was one of the complaints about this. I'd say honestly, my only complaint about Jekyll is I'm not a Ruby developer, and the Ruby ecosystem is a bit of a pain. Like trying to get, once upon a time, Ruby was easily pre-installed on my Mac and it worked, and I could update it and stuff. Apple decided that no, that's not cool. We're gonna just totally ruin it and make it so it's kind of a pain in the butt to put Ruby on my laptop, and I gotta deal with Ruby version managers and all kinds of crap like that. And so every time I'm installing Ruby to get this working, I feel like I'm pulling my hair out. But other than that, once I get that going, Jekyll's cool. So on the other, there's another one that I use constantly. It's called Hugo, and Hugo is built in Go. And one of the benefits of Hugo, number one, is Jekyll's a little bit built more for blogs and stuff. You can get it to do anything, but Jekyll kind of out of the box tries to make you make a blog. Hugo is more for everything. Also, Go is, because it's built in Go, it's blazingly fast, so the build times are crazy. So like sometimes I know people who have built massive sites sometimes choose Hugo because rendering thousands of pages, like not rendering, building them, right, in the build process, like can often take a long time. So Hugo is usually blazing fast. We've already talked a lot about Gatsby. It's JavaScript, but it's JavaScript, as you could see from the presentation there, it's JavaScript and React, right? Like it's React-based JavaScript. There are others, like 11 was mentioned before, that is just JavaScript if you're not into React. And so but Gatsby's become a very popular option, particularly among the React developer community. And then another one, just to kind of give you an example of that, there's like a Python one. If you're into Python, there's one called Pelican that's quite popular for Python. So whatever your language of choice, whatever your preference of how these tools work, there's probably one out there for you. There are kind of a handful, I'd say like half a dozen or so, there are the kind of commonly used ones, and then there's 358 others. So let's take a look at the basics of JAMStack. Like what does it take when I'm building a JAMStack site? So as you could see even from the earlier presentation, you're gonna use the command line quite a lot. So a lot of what you're doing to for testing and for for building and so on, you're gonna have to be a little bit more comfortable in the command line because most of this happens on the command line. And so, I mean, there are a handful of static site tools out there that actually have like kind of, you know, GUI interfaces, but for the most part they don't. And so most of your interaction with whatever the build, you know, your static site generator tool is going to be on the command line, as well as a lot of the other pieces of the JAMStack. You're going to be doing a lot of command line work. So I mentioned before, Markdown plays a big role. How many of you are comfortable writing Markdown? Most of you? Yeah, okay. So Markdown plays a big role. Like it's not required by any means. I mean, for the most part, static site generators will generate from HTML, or I mean, you can even find some that like if you don't like Markdown and you like other flavors of markup like that, you can use those as well. But oftentimes it assumes that the content is in Markdown. It's a thing to consider, especially when we're looking at tools like Tina and or even the stuff that we're doing at StackBit, right? Markdown is not an easy thing. You may think it's easy, but it's not an easy thing for content people. Like content creators, the people who work at your company who like are gonna have to edit this content do not want to learn Markdown. And you may say like, oh, it's just a handful of little markups, and it's not really, because any of you who've really messed with it know. Okay, well, you want to do that? Yeah, that you have to do in HTML, and you want to do that? Yeah, you got to do that in HTML too. So like, how about I teach you Markdown and HTML so that you can actually edit this content, which is not what you want to do. So it is something to consider. But as you can see, there are a lot of tools coming out to help you bridge that gap between the people who are going to have to edit the content in Markdown under the covers, but they don't have to actually interact with the Markdown. They can use an editor that they feel comfortable with. So the other part of the markup, generally speaking, besides the HTML, obviously, is templating. So every static site generator pretty much has kind of a default templating language. Like in this case, I'm using like handlebars, right? So and then it'll have other ones like Jekyll, for instance, has liquid. Most of them allow you to switch between them if you're not comfortable with one. I mean, I find it kind of, for the most part, it's to me it's either two curly braces or a curly brace and a percent sign. I mean, it's really not significantly different. Once upon a time, I had a project where I rewrote the same site, which was about Adventure Time. So you can see, you notice a theme? And I had rewritten it in like 12 different static site generators, and each used different, whatever templating language they defined, and most of them were pretty straightforward and easy to use, and they're very, very similar. The one thing I'd say when you're looking at them is sometimes the templating language has a lot of tools to do formatting and stuff like that. That's really easy. Like that's one of the things I love about Liquid is there's lots of filters and formatting tools, whereas like some of the others, if you want to do that, you have to kind of roll your own, and it's a pain in the butt. So that's one thing to consider when you're looking at that. So this came up in the other talk as well, this concept of front matter, and I don't know if any of you were like, what the heck is, I don't even know what front matter is. What's front matter? Basically any file within your JAMStack site that your static site generator will touch has metadata in the front of it, right? For the most part, like you could actually put this, even I think most of them will even accept it on like CSS or JavaScript files or any file. For the most part, this is like on your Markdown and on some other things like that. You're not going to put it, it's not necessarily going to show up on every file, but that's something available in most of them for you to be able to do. So you can add some, like I can put some data in there that tells me something like maybe variables I want to be able to use in there and things like that. Because it's all statically, it generates it and builds it, it's gonna fill all that stuff in for you. So like in this case, this would be kind of a typical kind of front matter for a blog post or article on a thing, right? So each of these tools will kind of have some default properties that you probably have to use on content. And then it also, one of the nice things is it allows you just to make up front, like data. So like, so like in this case, that famous quote would not be a default property that would be required by, but that, let's say I wanted that on all of my posts, I could add that in, and then I can access that whenever I'm building the site, right? So it allows you a lot of flexibility to add data properties to almost anything. And the nice thing is, I could add that to this post and not in another one. And I could make it a renderer know, like, oh, if it exists, just show it. If it doesn't exist, don't. So like, I don't have, it doesn't mean like I add this and suddenly I have like a schema that I have to follow in all of them. For the most part, and I don't know how, maybe Gatsby is different, but for them, some of them, most of them, it's flexible. You can add it to one and not to another and so on. This is, and by the way, so front matter is usually done in YAML or TOML, but like, it depends on the tool, right? So data is often like you can use JSON, you can use YAML, you can use TOML. I mean, oftentimes they allow you to kind of use anything like that. Even a lot of them allow, like by default, you to use a CSV. So this is static data that's on a file. This is different from like the data I'm going to connect to that's on an API, right? So this is like if I wanted to, in this case, have something that rendered a list of the Teen Titans that is going to show up on the sidebar, right? And that's always going to be the same. I don't need to call an API for that. I could put that in a data file and have that statically generate at the time that I build the site. So deployment. So these are just a few of the options. So I mentioned before, GitHub Pages actually is effectively a deployment option for this, but and that's twofold. I mean, you could build it locally and deploy it to GitHub Pages for free. But I mention it mostly because if you use Jekyll, you could just actually push the site. Like I check in something on my Jekyll page, it builds it for me and puts it out there. The middle one is a Zeit, which I don't have a lot of experience with, but I've heard really great things about. The one I mostly use is Netlify. So the nice thing about these tools, number one, except for GitHub Pages, Zeit and Netlify are going to do some things that help you start to make these dynamic, right? Like start to bring this out of just static pages, right? So for instance, as an example, like Netlify has a forms handling function. This is kind of the basics, right? So like if I have a form and I want to be able to handle that form, but obviously this is a static page and I don't want to have to post it out to like some service or anything like that. Like it has things that makes it just so like a service that I can handle the forms, and then nobody ever sees behind the scenes that this is all static. That all they know is they filled out a form, submit, and what was supposed to happen happened, right? And there's all kinds of things I can actually, like Netlify allows me, like, okay, now that I can watch an event, if once the form submits, I can trigger something else to happen, right, behind the scenes. And so it adds in a whole bunch of capabilities beyond just the deployment, right? So the deployment is big in and of itself, right? Like I connect it to a GitHub repository, I check in my file, and I don't have to deal with building and deploying it. Like I check in that file, it says, oh, I see a change, let me build this thing and deploy it. Then there's all kinds of other features, like for instance, let's say I want to be able to kind of build a site, but I don't want to mess with my public site, so I can actually deploy a branch and keep that branch deployment private, so I can see how my changes to the site are working and things like that. They've got serverless functionality, like I can build functions that do things like on my site. That a simple one was like, okay, I wanted you to be able to sign up for my mailing list that goes through, originally through MailChimp, but it's a different service now. But anyway, point is, calls out to MailChimp API, signs you up for it, and returns, and then my site says, oh yeah, you're signed up now. And all that happens on a site that's completely static, right? Theoretically. So there's all kinds of things you can do with that, and a lot of those services are built into both like Zeit and Netlify. They have different options. Some of them are free. A lot of them are free. Some of them are paid, and some of them are like paid after you reach a certain point if you're using it a lot. So it really depends on how far you go. But those are kind of like the main deployment options. Obviously, this is static files. You can deploy it wherever the heck you want, right? Anywhere that you can deploy static files, you can deploy it. You could put it on S3. You could put it on Azure. Has their own thing that, I talked with my friends from Microsoft the other day, and I'm like, Yeah, so I can check in my file to Netlify and it builds it on, or I can go through these 50 steps to deploy it to Azure. But, but they're working on it, he assured me. It will get better. But you could deploy it there. You could just, anywhere you could serve up static files, it'll work because it's just static files, which is one of the great benefits in that for you as a developer is not just, I think the whole build and deployment process has gotten really easy, but it's also cheap. Right? I don't have to pay for application servers and all this other, and databases and all this other stuff. All of this stuff is relatively inexpensive. So I was mentioning this before, but so serverless, technically, it's not JAMStack, double S. It's just JAMStack. But serverless plays a big part in that APIs, right? So as I was mentioning before, Netlify, for instance, has Netlify functions, which behind the scenes are just running on AWS, like they're still just AWS Lambda, but it builds in a whole bunch of things like I can just build it locally, right? I put a check in a JavaScript file, it knows, it says, oh, hey, this is a function, it goes out and it deploys it to AWS for me, and then I can call that API and use it as an endpoint for whatever I want to do, right, in my JAMStack site. So serverless kind of powers the ability to make this do pretty much whatever you want it to do. If you're building if you're building Netflix, this probably isn't going to work for your Netflix. But 90% of the web out there is not super complex applications. 90% of the web is content focused with some interactivity, and that's what this is amazing at doing. And serverless is what really kind of makes that. It took it from the 5 years ago when I was presenting about this, and it's like, yeah, it's great for your blog and great for your regular content site that doesn't change a lot. I even wrote that in the book. Like, if it changes a lot, don't use this. And it's great for your documentation maybe, but serverless is kind of what's changed that, right? Like, it's taken us to a point where we now can. There's most any site you could build in this architecture. So that's kind of all the concepts. I wanted to share some resources with you that I think are useful. So jamstack.org is that's the site where originally they kind of coined the term, but it also now is a great resource for best practices and examples and other links to other community resources. That's actually maintained by Netlify. StaticGen is also maintained by Netlify. They've got a list of static site generators it's not 364 of them. This is more like the real ones you probably want to consider that are regularly maintained, and you can filter it by some criteria. JAMStack themes is one that we maintain at StackBit, and basically, if you're like me and you suck at design, so this is a list of themes, and you've picked oh, here's the static site generator that I want to use, and I actually want to use this CMS. You can filter it down to some criteria to pick a theme and get it started, right? So it's a great way to get started. And I mentioned this headlesscms.org, and the rest of this got cut off. But headlesscms.org, so the whole headless CMS concept is kind of key here, as you saw in the presentation before. But if I want to be able to turn this from something where to change the content, I have to edit a markdown file locally and then deploy it, right, to something that we can actually change the content in a backend that our content editors are familiar with. The whole headless CMS thing is important in that it basically, a headless CMS is, think of it as the back end of a CMS without the front end. So I don't have to. So it's not tied to a particular front end. I can build the front end however I want, but the people editing the site can use tools that they're used to for creating and editing pages, without needing my front end architecture needing to be tied to a CMS framework. Right? And any of you have messed with this. My advice at companies I used to work with was when we were choosing a CMS, I'm we'd come down to the last 2 or 3, and they're Brian, which one should we choose? And I'm pick anyone, you'll hate it in a year. And it was always true. That rule stayed true. So I think that was it for resources, but I'm open to questions. Anybody got any questions? Thank you.
So I'm curious, since you didn't like the name JAMStack, what were the names you didn't like before?
So when they wrote me about it originally, and I was like, they asked if I liked the name, and I'm like, no, I don't, but I don't have any better ideas. So I'm like, so JAMStack it is, and you know what? I'd say for a long time it really didn't catch on, and then honestly, it's been the JAMStack conferences that have really kind of made it. People started using the term and popularized it. So. Yeah.
I'm curious about the security aspect, particularly between like when you write the drop-in APIs to sign up for your newsletter. How is managing that between the static files and then all of a sudden this user doesn't have that access, etc.
So that's part of it. Why, like for instance, that mail API I was calling, that's actually happening on a server somewhere, right? Like so that's the actual, tokens and everything are passed behind the scenes. Like on the front end, the user is just interacting with the endpoint that I created, right? So however I want to manage access to that is how I manage access to it, right? Like, I don't have to directly call the API. That's why these serverless functions kind of play a big role in it. I can intermediate that by building a function on my own that then interacts with the API and handles all the token passing and so on and so forth. And one thing I didn't mention, another thing, it was shown a little bit in the Tina thing, is services like or Netlify has their Netlify identity and things like that. You want to be able to add in, like, ability for a user to authenticate on your site and stuff like that. It's possible to that works with I'm trying to think. There's a the Obamacare website. That's okay. Okay. The Obamacare website. When it stayed up, right? When it was.
It didn't work, so they rebuilt it in Jekyll.
Oh, is that what it is? Oh, in Jekyll, even. Okay, cool. I didn't know that. Wasn't the whole like Popeyes or something? Didn't they run something off? Wasn't it running off JAMStack? I know there's been some like. If you go to, I would check out Netlify's site and things like. They have some good case studies that will show you some very well-known sites that are running JAMStack. I know, honestly, even for our company, we're talking to, there's companies that are starting to use these tools that I didn't even think were considering it, or are already using the tools, and I'm like, I wouldn't have known, right? I never know when I interact with their site that they were. But then they come to us and they're like, oh yeah, we'd like to use your tools for this and that, and then that's how we find out, hey, behind the scenes they're JAMStack. But I can't think of any names offhand. Yeah, there was another question right there.
Thanks. So if a website offers a static site generator, if it uses like serverless functions and maybe like some sort of like Firebase database, is that still like JAMStack?
Yeah. So I guess the quick answer would be there are multiple ways you can interact with whatever API you want to deal with. Well, number one is I can interact with that using JavaScript on the front end and get that data like on the client, right? Whether it's through directly to Firebase or whether I create a serverless function in between that to handle whatever I need to handle, right? Or logic. But then there's another piece of that, which in some ways, like some of these, when you look at these headless CMS, that's how it works, is I could actually call that on the build side, pull stuff over and turn it into static files. So like when for instance, if I were to use Contentful as a backend for like a headless CMS backend, like they basically have some tooling that, you know, for some of these static type generators that will go ahead and it will call the APIs, pull all the content, write the files, and then you build, right? So there's kind of, it's tough to think about it in that way. I think it's a little confusing. You can do it on the build side depending on the type of thing you're going to do, and if this is something that you need to call dynamically all the time, but like in this case, that's content that doesn't necessarily change every few minutes, so I can actually pull it on the build side. So like, as another example, the creator of 11D has something that he likes to have control of his content, he says. So like he posts to Twitter, but he has a tool that in 11D that will call the API, pull his tweets down, and write them to static files, and then post them to his site, right? So, I mean, that's another way of dealing with these things. And even tools like 11D, for instance, have some built-in functionality, and I think Gatsby does too, right? Like, so I can even just put the API I want to connect to in there, and it'll go ahead and give me some ability to pull that stuff automatically without having to build a whole thing to do that, and then process it on the build side. So there's build side calling it an API, and then there's client side calling it the APIs. That makes sense. All right. Was there any other questions? Otherwise, I have one more. Yeah.
I just wanted to kind of tail off of that question. Are there any solutions today that you wanted a mixed blend of whether you're going to do it on build or fetching? Maybe you have 40,000 products in an e-commerce website, and the build is just going to take a long time to get those assets generated. So the build finishes early, and if something hasn't been fetched and written to the file, then
Yes. So it's kind of, they call it, I think, was it Gatsby coined the term, the rehydrate or whatever? One of them. So that's the concept you read about, like this rehydration concept. Like you build the static stuff, and then you call the API, and then you load the content back into the container. I know some of them, like the rehydration is like the container is like the full page, but others are working on like kind of like partial rehydration. So like say this particular widget, I want to reload the content, and then I can pull that out and re-render that content in there, if that makes sense. Right? So yes, there's some tools that allow that kind of thing. All right. Oh, one more.
Just curious, have you heard of anything where it uses like cron jobs? Let's say you want to pull a bunch of events from like meetup.com. And so it's not like all the time, maybe like once a day. And
Right.
But you don't touch it because it's being handled by kind of meetup,
Yeah.
and you just want to show it on your site.
Yeah. So there are ways to deal with it. So the way there are different ways to deal with it. For instance, I do that on the Certified Fresh Events site. I need to rerun and call different stuff, and what I set up is, because I want it hands off. So I said you can either set up something that watches that and then runs the build, because you can actually trigger the build to happen whenever you want via events and things like that. And even Netlify has now got a beta of these things called build plugins that you can tie into the whole build process at any point, which is really cool. And you can basically build like functions, they're Netlify functions, which are Lambda functions that run at any point in that build process, or I can even trigger the build that way and things like that. But I use Zapier. I don't know if you ever heard of Zapier, and I have a Zapier thing that runs and it watches, and every time something happens over here, it says, okay, trigger the build at Netlify. Boom, it pulls sites done, built, and that's how it. There's also like even our StackBit tools, like sit there and they watch Contentful, and as soon as they see Contentful, we have Contentful or Forestry or whatever, anytime they see a change in any of those that we support, like that your site is connected to, it triggers the build automatically and pushes it out. So you don't ever have to, if you were the one who built the site, you don't have to sit there and like, oh, somebody changed the content, I need to run a build. Like, even though it's sitting there on an API that's not, like, it knows, it watches it and it says, okay, this change happened in the back end of Contentful, like pull that stuff, run the build, and deploy it. Make sense?
So does it check for changes? Like in
Yeah.
the older version of Contentful, it's like, oh, there's a new one.
Yeah, it
You
checks
kinda know.
if there's a new, like somebody updated a page. Yeah, it'll check for a change, and if it sees a change, it'll push the whole build out. So yeah, it's entirely possible. There's a ton of different ways to do it depending on the specifics of what are the APIs you're connecting to and so on. I mean, your meetup example would be kind of an example of like what Zach Leatherman is doing with his tweets. He's just watching his tweets, and when he tweets, it pulls it and deploys it. And because it doesn't have to do a full rebuild, I think he just does like kind of a partial rebuild, so that it's actually really fast. It's just added into his site. So cool. I got some. Obviously, I'm here every month, so you can always find me. But if you want to find me outside of that, you can find me at RemoteSynth on Twitter. Or you can just email me at brian@stackbit.com, and that's it. Thank you all. Thanks to Forestry and Jordan for coming out, and thank you all for coming out. And next month we're still working on next month. I don't know if we're going to have a meetup or we're going to have just kind of a social gathering. So we'll let you know soon. But thanks all for coming out.